Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. My name is Sarah Collins, and I'm back here with my daughter, Annabelle Collins. We recorded an episode number 12, that really talked about prioritization, planning, organizing within our homeschool day, and what helped us to make decisions and what helped her to plan out her whole day to get things done. After that, I got a lot of feedback, overwhelmingly positive, although she says she rambled a lot, but
I did. I don't know how much of you look at her Instagram, but she has quotes that she puts up, like right as we put out the podcasts. We couldn't find one for me because I said but and okay, and I would stop myself. So that's my goal here. So I apologize if I'm talking slow because I'm going to try to overthink everything that I say. So
So here we are. A person asked from there, well, how do you decide what else to participate in? So we wanted to just hop back here and answer that question today. So before you listen here, maybe hop back to episode 12 and listen to that beginning episode, ignore her ands and buts, and really think about the message that she was saying. So before we continue, I do want to make sure that you recognize the mission of Homeschool OT, which is that there is not one right way to homeschool, but my role is to help to provide resources and recommendations that you can artfully apply to your students and what they specifically need and want to do. So that is different than what my daughter here might need and want to do, what my boys need and want to do. It's how they occupy their time. So I'm going to list a lot of resources and recommendations, things that we've done, and then you can choose how to apply this to your homeschool. It might be that you say none of this is helpful. It might be that you say, wow, this is all really great. I want to do it all. Fantastic. I'm here for you either way, but not to contribute to the noise or the pressure, but instead to contribute some, hopefully, wisdom coming from the OT homeschool mom perspective and also from my daughter who's in it and doing it right now. So some of the OT literature that kind of plays into how we've just made these decisions and priorities. So Adolf Meyer, who was actually one of the founding fathers of occupational therapy, he hired first Eleanor Clark Slagle, who was one of the very first OTs at Johns Hopkins. And it was in the late 1800s. And he talked about his philosophy of the balance between work, play, rest, and sleep. And we still are finding that this, throughout research, it makes a lot of sense, that it really is something that we need to be striving towards. So if we think about work, what that is what actually gives us a little bit of cortisol. It goes to our brains, right? It can be cortisol if we have too much, is where the term stressed out comes from. But it also is what gets our bodies moving, our brains moving and processing and thinking. Like we have to have a certain amount of it. So this is work that helps to stimulate that. Play is more self-directed. So when we're thinking self-directed, we cannot think, oh, play, the adult-directed sports, the adult-directed music lessons, the adult-directed whatever, clubs. Instead, we have to think about self-initiated and self-directed. Oftentimes requires some sort of risk within our children, which then leads them to know their bodies and their brains better. This also helps provides our brains with oxytocin, which helps to decrease that stress or balance it out. Rest is where we quiet the brain. So this is now oftentimes known as mindfulness. It's where we can increase our interoception. It's where we're paying attention to our heart rates, to our blood pressure, where we are just sitting and processing. And actually, we laughed this morning. We always watch a 10-minute news podcast in the morning, listen to it. And there's literally a competition now. Where was it? Japan on being restful for the longest, like who could do it for the longest.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to look at your phone, or you had to keep your eyes closed. I'm actually not completely sure, but it was like time, and they had your heart rate on a machine, and they were tracking everything. My generation's screwed is pretty much the bottom line of that. So
we're turning rest now into a competition, which, you know what, if it's going to help people to begin to understand the reasons why, great, fine, wonderful. It is a necessary part of the day. And research actually shows, though, that a few minutes of this mindfulness or of rest is actually more productive than over an hour of any screen time. So it helps your body to rejuvenate. So when you're thinking, I just feel groggy and exhausted and I just want to lay here and zone out and, Netflix and chill, take a few minutes of just mindfulness, of noticing things around you. Our interoception podcast with Elizabeth Sauter talks a lot about this throughout the day. So jump back to that one as well. And then sleep is the last part of this balance. And we are going to dive really deeply into sleep in a few episodes with my good friend Karen. It will be episode 26. So listen to that one too. It's on June 26th. It is not episode 26, June 26th. All right. Now the homeschool literature that kind of plays right into this, that helped us to really think through our mission as a family and prioritization, which, first of all, you need to take a second, maybe even pause this and turn on the homeschool anthem on Apple Music. It's by Shama
Marama.
It is hysterical. It is a parody on homeschooling, so you need to be ready for that, but it is really funny. And he talks in there about reading C.S. Lewis within homeschooling. So
it's too accurate.
So C.S. Lewis wrote The Abolition of Man, and it really talks about ordering our thinking and prioritizing. And that is one book that I read early on within homeschooling and really made me ponder what our own priorities were and if mine were in the right spot. Now, as far as other literature that I've read, every single year, I try to read something on rest and going slower. It is really easy in this day and age to add on and pile on and build more and more and more into every day and think if you're not, that you're missing out. And with that, we often feel pressure to do all the things. And then we feel grumpy because our life is not in balance of work, play, rest, and sleep. It's oftentimes work, 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 work. And when that does happen, I get especially grumpy, which then plays off into my family. And so I try to help with that slowing process by reading something each summer. So we have done The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and then we listen to the podcast together as a family. We have read Present Over Perfect by Shauna Niequist. I read that one a few years ago. Growing Slow by Jennifer Dukes-Lee. I read that one last summer. These are all books that just help to remind us of priorities and that making things slow down is not a bad idea.
And she gets new ideas
of ways to slow.
Let's do this, guys. Let's go on a screen fast.
We are. Currently, we are on a screen fast, which is going very, very well. And there's actually going to be a podcast about that experience coming up here as well. So I do want to turn over, though, to Annabelle here about what are some questions that you ask yourself when you are trying to prioritize the activities that you do.
Okay, so I have a few things that I really use to digest what I'm doing. I'm an overthinker. So pretty much everything that I do, I have lots of questions behind it. I also have known my family to ask questions. They counted one time. It was astonishing. So I think I really do need to focus on what I love to do, because I don't really have a whole lot of time every day, and I need to spend that time doing what I love to do. I was a swimmer for a very long time, and I think I transitioned out of that. It wasn't easy, but I think it was necessary, especially because I made room for me to do other things that I wanted to do and that I would prefer to do. And I think that, like, decisions and cutting things out is definitely not easy, but it is necessary and it will be helpful in the future.
So talk a little bit more about that switch, because it is unfortunate, but a lot of times in our society today, like the sport or the activity that you start with when you're younger, oftentimes just is who you become. Like people identify with their activities. So I'm a swimmer, or with their careers. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm a teacher. I'm a dancer. I'm whatever. And so when that is removed, it can be harder to recognize who you are. So how have you kind of worked through that?
I mean, we've talked about this a ton and about where you place your identity because for a long time, I felt like I didn't know who I was. And so I was placing my identity in either things that I felt or things that I was doing. And so when I separated those two things, I got a lot stronger in my faith and I started to put my identity in Jesus. And then everything else just kind of became things that I enjoy to do. It stopped being my identity and it ended up being just something that Annabelle likes to do, which is when I decided, okay, so I'm gonna stop swimming. I ended up starting volleyball, which is now I do that all of the time. And that's really fun for me. But I think if it stops becoming fun, I won't do it because it's not my identity.
Love that. Now, you also just mentioned you started something later. Do you remember how old you were when you started volleyball?
12.
12. Okay. So there are certain sports that I feel like, whatever, you start it at any point in time because you have an interest in it. My son, on the other hand, is a hockey player. And when you are 13, you start checking. And so if you start that sport at that point in time, it can be very dangerous, right? So it's hard to think about. And it's, I think, a disservice to our children somewhat that we do have to choose so early on. But at the same time, like I am all for risky play. In fact, I talk about risky play quite a bit, but risky play and dangerous play are two very, very different things. And again, sports are not considered play, but there are risk and danger associated with them. So our children knowing who they are and putting in the work of how active that they can be and how safe they can be within a sport is a really important consideration. With volleyball, you didn't have that situation, right? It's not quite as dangerous of a sport.
No, it's definitely there was never a danger factor, but it is like I mean you jump into these people that have been playing it since they were like 7, and you have missed out on this time. So I definitely had to play catch up a little bit, but I got there.
And I think that's can be hard, but also really brave. I didn't realize how brave that was until right now. So, so sometimes having to change sports or change activities or whatever as we get older, it's kind of can be really hard. Tell me a little bit about how you prioritize activities. Like what else do you look for besides just like something that you really love? Are there other things that you think about?
Yeah, so I play club volleyball, right? And so I know I want to do it, but how you want to do it is a very different thing. So I look at the organization behind it, and I think that that's really important because, like you said, they're adult-led activities. So the adults that are in your life for that period of time is really, really important. But I definitely need to focus on that.
So, yeah, that really brings up a good point. So, we as a family have always have the philosophy that we are not parenting alone. And in fact, you've probably heard me say homeschooling is not alone schooling. The research all across the board talks about community and how important that is. And if you listen back to episode 2, I talked quite a bit about community with Christy Faith and Colleen Kessler. But it is important to think about who the adults are that are pouring into our children, because no matter what, if you've got coaches, if you've got teachers, if you've got, tutors or club leaders or whatever, they have an influence for your children. So, Belle, are there things that you look for in an adult that you are
Yeah.
your coaches? Tell me more.
Well, I mean, it's not like you can pick your coaches, but I think I have adults in my life that I have chosen to be, because I mean, you're amazing, but you can't be everything.
True.
So I definitely do have other adults, and I think I look for similarities between our personalities or circumstances and interests, and then just kind of how communication can happen, because I think that who's pouring into your life, it really shapes you. Like, it shapes who you are, especially when you're younger. And so I think that's been a really important thing that I've learned throughout my life, and I think I'm very selective with who I put in my life. As like, I have a lot of people in my life that I just say like, okay, so I don't really take advice from this person, like I'll talk to them, blah blah blah, that's the end. But I'm very selective with who I do actually like listen to and take advice from, because that's an important thing that you have to consider.
And I think we as a family have had to make some of those decisions as far as organizations that our kids have participated in. A few years ago, we pulled her out of an organization because it could be replaced. Now there's one program there that couldn't, and so she still stays there. But because of things like the email communication was not kind, and that's not how I want to teach her. I mean, I run a business, like how we want to teach, and our words matter. So what we say, how we type it, all of that makes a big difference. And we talked about that as a family. I always will expect that kids are going to make mistakes. And in fact, I think we need to let them make mistakes, right? So some of the sportsmanship and things that we see on my kids' teams, whatever, it is what it is. I want us to be able to talk about it and learn from it, not remove ourselves from it. But the adults are a different story. And so when they allow things on teams or activities or whatever without having a conversation, then that's not something that we want to participate in. I am fully aware that things are going to happen in locker rooms, things are going to happen in clubs. If a coach can talk about it or can acknowledge it, fantastic, let's move on. If they're going to sweep it under the rug and not have that conversation, then we're not going to participate, because we are all about growth and wisdom.
Yup.
So I think we've kind of covered it, especially since this is just our small bonus episode, but that the questions that you ask yourself really are about what do you love and how do you want to spend your time, and what adults are there and how are they going to pour into you.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you have it. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We know that there are so many places that you could be, so I am really grateful that you spend some time with us here at Homeschool OT.